So, if you're thinking of moving to Michigan, Lansing specifically, I bet one of the first questions that come to mind is, how much is it going to cost me to rent here? And the truth is, it depends. A one-bedroom in Lansing can cost dramatically cheaper than a one-bedroom in Okemos, Haslett, or Holt. And if you're looking for a house instead of an apartment, the numbers change drastically again. So, today we're going to break down what it actually costs to live in the Greater Lansing area, from apartments to houses. We're going to be looking at East Lansing, Lansing, Haslett, Okemos, and Holt, just name a few. And if you're really considering moving to Lansing, stick around to the end because I'm going to talk about something that most renters don't consider before they make the jump. And what consideration is that, you ask? Well, at what point does it make more sense to buy in Lansing than to rent? We'll get into that. Before we talk about prices, we need to talk about what area we're speaking about. The Greater Lansing area is much more than just the city of Lansing and East Lansing that most people are familiar with. You've got communities like Okemos, Holt, Mason, DeWitt, and Grand Ledge that are all also within the Greater Lansing area. And that's important because the area you choose is going to drastically contribute to how much you pay in rent. For example, using data from Zillow, pulling all the different rentals from one bedroom up to full house rentals, we can see that the average rent in Lansing is $1,100. East Lansing, however, is around $1,600, but that can be misleading because student dorms can be quite cheap, but also have a barrier to entry if you're not a student. Haslett comes in just under $1,400 roughly. Holt, to the south of Lansing, also comes in around $1,100, very similar to the city of Lansing. Okemos comes out on top by far, averaging around $1,950 per month. And then you have DeWitt coming in at about $1,550 per month. Now, don't just simply look at these numbers and assume that an apartment in Lansing costs $1,100 and an apartment in Okemos costs $1,950, because that's not the whole story. These are averages across available inventory of all different sizes in all these different places. So it just gives us kind of a ballpark estimate. These numbers are very useful in understanding the market, but are not a pure determination of the actual market, which is constantly fluctuating. So, what does renting in Lansing actually cost? Well, let's start with Lansing itself. Currently, if you take a look at the market, you'll find that the range within Lansing is quite vast. You can find single rooms for $500 a month, all the way up to houses or multiple room apartments for $2,000 and over. This makes Lansing a pretty broad rental market, which is great if you're on a tight budget. There's usually availability regardless of the season, and more so, you'll usually be able to find something within your price range, which might not always be guaranteed in some of these other cities and towns around Lansing. If you're on a tighter budget, I would recommend starting in Lansing because of the affordability and the wider range of rental units that tend to be available. We can also get a better idea about the rental market in Lansing when we break it down by bedroom. Zillow currently has the average one-bedroom apartment in Lansing going for about $915 as of today. If you're from out of state, you might be thinking it's pretty wild that you can even get an apartment for under $1,000. But in Lansing, that's pretty common, and throughout Michigan, where rental prices tend to be lower, it's not all too shocking, but there are parts of Michigan where under $1,000 is quite hard to find. And although $915 a month sounds like a great deal, you have to remember that's also not the whole picture. You also consider the other additional costs that go in, such as if you have pets, renter's insurance, possibly being charged extra for additional parking spots or covered parking, and of course your utilities. So remember, don't just go purely off the advertised rental cost. You got to look at the full picture before you make this decision. East Lansing, however, is a totally different market, and this is where things start to get interesting. East Lansing is the home of Michigan State University, and so the rental market here is dictated largely by the student population. And that means you can find things like relatively inexpensive rooms in houses or old studio apartments, all the way up to brand new, recently constructed lofts and multi-room apartments. So going back to those Zillow numbers, if we look at East Lansing, it was an average of about $1,600 a month, and that's counting all different sizes of rentals, but that's still $500 more than living in Lansing. And there are parts of Lansing and East Lansing that, them bordering each other, it's a 5-minute walk between the two. And that cost difference can really catch you unexpectedly. But once again, we can't also just expect that we're going to always pay $500 more a month living in East Lansing, because it is such a wide spread of different types of rental units. I mean, you have professors and staff at the university that have chosen to rent rather than own, and they're going to live a little bit more luxuriously than a student or someone working a standard 9-to-5 job. So just remember, the market in East Lansing is going to be drastically different. If you're a student that's just trying to live close to campus and walk to school versus a family that's trying to live close to the downtown and to the shopping centers, you're going to find two very different rental markets in the same city. So now let's move over to Okemos. If you recall, Okemos was the most expensive when we listed our averages around $1,950 per month. That number is significantly higher than Lansing and East Lansing. And the big reason behind that is because Okemos is a town known more for families and for professionals, especially professionals that do work at the university. The average 1-bedroom in Okemos right now is about $1,269 a month, which is a lot lower than $1,900. The average 2-bedroom is coming in around $1,567. So you see it starts to jump up pretty quickly as soon as you start adding more size and more room. The average 3-bedroom, which at this point we're starting to get into small houses, is over $2,000 a month in Okemos. Okemos tends to attract families and professionals that work at the university, and these people are usually willing to pay a little bit more for newer construction, to be in more developed areas, and to be close to lots of shops and dining. So, if your budget is about $1,000 a month, Okemos is probably not the first place you want to start looking. But if you're comfortable spending $1,500 a month and upwards, then Okemos might be just the place for you. So, you might be wondering, what's a good balance between the two? Well, that's where we start to get to Haslett and Holt. I myself lived in Haslett for about a year and enjoyed it immensely. Haslett has access to the wonderful Lake Lansing, and it's kind of got parks and some restaurants and bars and dining all around it. It's also very close to Okemos, so just a very short drive to get to places like the Meridian Mall. And it's very close to East Lansing as well. So if you are a university student, or if you work at the university, it's not too bad of a commute. So looking back further into the Zillow data, we can see that a 1-bedroom in Haslett is going for about $1,150 a month, and a 2-bedroom jumping up to about $1,300 a month. Holt, on the other hand, which is just south of Lansing, gives a little bit more flexibility, with the average 1-bedroom right now, once again pulling from the Zillow data, being about $895 a month, and a 2-bedroom being under $1,200 a month. When we start getting to 3 bedrooms and kind of that starter house rental, it gets closer to about $1,500 a month in Holt. But I kind of foresee those prices jumping up because I've been hearing a lot of people talking about how much they love Holt and the convenience of getting to any type of job in South or Central Lansing. And I do expect that as people start to move more towards the Lansing area, we'll probably see more people looking at Holt. So we can see that Lansing and Holt kind of give a more budget-friendly option. Haslett and East Lansing are kind of in the middle, a little bit flexible. And at the top, we have Okemos, which, if you can afford it, it's a great place to live, but it is a little bit less accessible than these other places. So, where should you rent? Well, let's be logical about this. When I moved to the Lansing area, I started with my budget rather than with the location I wanted to be in. I would recommend the same for you. If your budget is $1,000, it's going to be more reasonable to start out looking in Lansing and possibly Holt. If your budget is more in the $1,200 to $1,300 range, I think Haslett and East Lansing are great spots to look at, and you can still look at Holt, you can still look at Lansing, and you can even start to look out towards Grand Ledge. And if you're more comfortable spending more money, $1,500 and above, I would say Okemos is a great place to look at, and you can also take a look at DeWitt if you kind of want to be a little bit more of a small town feel. And remember, the more rooms you're looking for, the more cost you can be expected to pay. And if you're looking specifically for a house, now you've moved to a totally different rental market with a different level of competition. Houses for rent do come up quite often in Lansing, but when you start to look in some of these other areas like Haslett and Holt, they don't come up quite as often. There's definitely not as much accessibility there. So, now let's get to the hidden costs. The costs that you might not think about before you sign that lease, because you're going to be paying more than what's just on that contract. Before you sign that lease, make sure to ask about the utilities. Gas, electric, trash, water, all those things are divvied up in different ways with different property management companies and different landlords. Some more things to consider are internet, which some apartment complexes out here actually only have one provider, so you're going to be locked in on that rate, whatever that provider sets the rate to. Pet rent and other pet fees if you have a cat, a dog, or maybe a bird. And parking. Parking is a big one. Being from California myself originally, I didn't think about parking, and when I moved into my first apartment when I moved to Lansing, I was like, I don't need a covered space. Why would I need that? Well, when winter comes, you might change your mind about not having a covered space, and when your car's frozen over and it's taken an additional 20 minutes in the morning before you can even hit the road, that covered space really seems worth the cost, and that cost has a wide range. It could be anywhere from a monthly $10, $20, $30 a month to a yearly maybe $200 or $300 a year. All depends. Those are just kind of ballpark numbers, but these are things you want to ask about before you sign a lease. And then there's the cost that goes in just for trying to find the apartment. We're talking application fees, which has become totally the norm amongst both property management groups and private landlords. We're talking about background screenings, which sometimes they will have you pay out of pocket to do that yourself. And we're talking rental insurance. Some apartment companies will hook you up with a provider who they have as a preferred provider, and you can get a good rate. Sometimes there's no assistance and you'll just have to find someone else to sell you rental insurance, but it will be required. So this just goes to show you that even two apartments that cost the same, say $1,300 a month, might actually run you a lot more or a lot less depending on how the property management or landlord go about these other costs, whether if you're paying for them or if they're helping covering them. And especially if you're moving from another state, you'll want to ask about snow removal. When it comes to the winter, snow removal, ice removal, it's no joke. It's very easy to get hurt slipping on the ice, and a lot of these apartment companies and private landlords will have in the lease that they have someone else directly responsible for the removal, whether it's a private contractor or someone that directly works for a property management company. And sometimes you won't even be allowed to shovel or remove the snow yourself. It will be up to that person that they dictate that responsibility to. So that's something you want to look at, and another hidden cost you want to make sure you're not paying for. So, what about renting a house? Let's talk about something a lot of folks overlook. Lansing has a lot of single-family houses that are kept on the rental market rather than sold. These houses are great if you yourself have a family, if you have a lot of pets, or if you just really want to have a yard and a little bit of privacy. The downside, obviously, is that the price difference between an apartment and a house can be quite significant. You're also more likely to be responsible for things like lawn care and snow removal, which means that you will have to plan to take time out of your day throughout the year to take care of those things. And bear in mind, single family homes can be harder to find simply because there's a lot more apartments in Lansing than there are single family homes. However, this city does have a lot, and from my experience, I have seen there's always quite a few on the market, but the prices do swivel back and forth pretty quickly and pretty frequently depending on the season in which they're trying to rent out. So that is something to keep in mind. One big key advice I would give is whether if you're looking for an apartment or a house, start looking early. Now, let's get to that thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that most people don't consider. Is it cheaper to simply buy than to rent? And the answer is, it depends. Lansing is a quite interesting market because home prices are so much cheaper than most other places in the country. But whether buying is for you is going to still depend on your personal circumstance. Looking again at the Zillow data, as of June 2026, the average home in Lansing sold for about $171,000, which is significantly cheaper than many other cities across the country. So yes, living in Lansing, homeownership is a lot more attainable than it is in other parts of the state, but it doesn't mean it's easy still. If you're moving here from out of state, I think renting for the first year could be a great idea because you can learn about the different communities in the area and really figure out where you want to live rather than immediately rush into buying a house, right? You don't want to be stuck in a house that you hate, in a neighborhood that you hate, in a community that you don't feel a part of. And if you're interested in checking out neighborhoods throughout the Greater Lansing area, I do have many neighborhood tours on this channel, so hopefully you can find that helpful. Just thought I would add that in there. For example, you may move to Lansing and buy one of these cheaper houses I was just talking about in Lansing. And a year and a half in, you realize that you'd way rather be living in Okemos or you'd way rather be living in Mason. That just Lansing doesn't do it for you. Also bear in mind that home ownership comes with a ton of costs that renting does not. For example, something breaks in your house that you just purchased, whether it's HVAC, a burst pipe in the winter, or maybe the AC unit stops running, that's a repair that's going to have to come out of your pocket. There's no landlord, there's no overnight maintenance team. You're going to have to solve it yourself, and sometimes that can be an expense that you're not ready for. So don't just think, oh, well, my mortgage would be cheaper than my rent. It's fair to think that, and it's a good path to allow your mind to meander down, but bear in mind that there is more cost than simply what's an estimate on Zillow or what an estimate on Redfin will tell you. I think one of the biggest advantages to living in the Greater Lansing area is the variety. I've lived in South Lansing, right on the border of Holt, which had much more of a city kind of urban feel to it. I've lived in Haslett, where I lived, the Namoki Trails apartment was kind of tucked back in the forest and a little bit more secluded. Pretty nice. Wonderful walking trails over there if you ever have the time to check that out. And where I live now in the Groesbeck neighborhood is just a wonderful suburban neighborhood. They all feel totally different, all great places to live, and all drastically different experiences living there. So I hope this kind of gives you a little rundown and gives you a little idea of what it's like to live in the Greater Lansing area and which part may be worth you investigating first if you're thinking of moving out this way. And if you're still trying to figure out which part of the Greater Lansing area is calling you, well, that's where my YouTube channel comes in. I post videos every week giving tips to buyers and sellers within the Greater Lansing real estate market. And something that's more unique to me, I do neighborhood tours. And I don't just put a green screen up behind me. I don't just drive by and film quickly and leave. Nope, I go walk these neighborhoods and things around the neighborhoods and try to give you some more insight to what's going on in these neighborhoods, the parks, the trails, the people that live there, the communities, the schools, really try to give you a feel for it. That way, if you don't have the time to go check it out yourself, I think this is the next best thing, and I hope it provides some value. I'll make sure to have a couple of those videos up at the end of this video if you want to look more into my neighborhood tours. And if you're looking for more help than what can be gleaned from a YouTube video, I also do offer my services in helping people find rentals. Although using a realtor for rentals is not too common in Michigan, I have already helped a few people out to great success finding rentals, especially if you're traveling a lot or if you just feel overwhelmed going through all the possible choices out there. It might be worth it for you to have someone help you out with it. I'd be happy to do so. My contact information is linked in every single video, so you can go ahead, check that out, find my email and phone number, and reach out to me if that's something you're interested in. Also, for my friends from out of state, or from people that are looking to move from, say, northern Michigan or eastern Michigan to central or western Michigan, I do have my free relocation guide attached in the description below, and I have it on most of my videos at this point. So go ahead, take a look at that, download it. Lots of good stuff in there. Hopefully will help you in making your decision easier if you think that Michigan and Central Michigan is the place for you. So thanks. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Like and subscribe if you found some value here. And until next time, take care.